anyhow, on Hanukkah, they celebrate with fried foods. And that's where you get your jelly donuts, and that's where you get your latkes and your fried potatoes and things like that, because it's a celebration of the oil, when they had the oil to be able to fill the lamps, which we'll get into that in just a minute. But first of all, happy Hanukkah. We are in the middle of the festival right now. We're in day 4 of the festival. And the original story is not found in the Bible. I'm sure many of you know that. We've talked about that at length. Or at least not in the Bible as Protestants would define it. Because you all know that the Protestants have 66 books of the canon. And the Catholics and Orthodox have, I think, 73 and 77. I think the Catholics have 73 and the Orthodox has 77. Were you wanting to say something, Andrew? Yeah, it's 40 to 65 strawberries to equal 1 donut. Yeah, so 40 to 65 strawberries to equal 1 donut. So enjoy your 60 strawberries if you have a donut. And here's the thing. I think if you have one on a rare occasion like Hanukkah, I don't think that's gonna cause any harm. You have a donut a couple times a year. Now, if you have 2 a day or 1 a day, or it might have some problems. But you can enjoy a sweet treat on a special occasion, I would think, even though I never do it because it messes my stomach up. But that's a whole separate issue. So there is a book in the Apocrypha called First Maccabees. Has anybody ever read First Maccabees? Yes, just me and Dee. First Maccabees is basically the story of the Jewish people under what's called the Seleucid Empire, which I'll tell you what that is in a minute, and really why all this is important. But it's not canonical, but it preserves historical and theological insight, and the account is far less sensational than it's been made out to be. It wasn't like this big miraculous war victory. They didn't have 8 days of miraculous oil, as some of the legends have claimed. Those were later rabbinic traditions that have no root in history. But what it was is basically guerrilla warfare, kind of almost like the United States, how it was founded, when people were just popping out of the hills and everything and ultimately overthrowing a dynasty. So go ahead and put my music back on real quiet to fill the quietness in the room. So Israel was living in a period during this time without prophetic voice. As a matter of fact, let's go to Amos. Amos chapter 8. And we're also going to be reading out of Malachi. Malachi chapter 4. Because I want to paint a picture of what life was like in Israel during this window that we're talking about. But in Amos chapter 8, I'm going to be reading verses 11 and 12. It says, "Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord God, that I will send a famine on the land. Not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord. And they shall wander from sea to sea and from north to east, and they shall run to and fro, seeking the word of the Lord, but shall not find it." So we're talking about a season in time where the voice of God was silent. This is also called the 400 years of silence. It's the period between around 400 AD until about the time of Christ. And what's really interesting about the book of Maccabees is 2 or 3 times it mentions that they couldn't do certain things because there was no prophet. See, when we don't have a prophetic voice, when we don't have someone saying, "Thus saith the Lord," when we don't have someone giving direction, what does Proverbs 29:18 tell us will happen? It says, "Where there is no vision, where there is no prophetic revelation, the people perish. But happy is he who keeps the law." See, when we lose our prophetic voice, we lose our direction. And that's exactly where we were with the nation of Israel. It was a nation that has lost its direction. It was a nation that was in captivity through exchanging multiple hands, which we'll get to in just a moment. But now let's look at Malachi chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. And this is how the Old Testament closes. It's just like, these are the last words spoken by a prophet, and then nothing else for 400 years. Imagine that. It says, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse." And then the prophetic voice falls silent. Amos chapter 8 comes to pass. There's a famine in the land, and it's not of food, but it's of hearing the voice of God. And if you can imagine the level of desperation of these people when, and they're having a party out in the foyer, aren't they? Hey, foyer people, get in here or be quiet. That's funny. So this era, as I said, has been called the 400 years of silence. Their land had been under foreign domination for well over a century. So we're talking over 100 years they had been in foreign domination. In 2 Kings chapter 24, verses 10 through 17, we see the reign of Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. In Ezra 1 through 4, we see the reign of Cyrus of Persia. So what happens is a kingdom would take over, and then they would be defeated. And when they were defeated, a new kingdom would take over, King Cyrus of Persia. And then it's like, what do we do with Israel? What do we do with these nations that we're occupying? And you'll notice in this verse, it says that the Lord stirred up the spirit of King Cyrus so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it in writing, saying, and he gives them permission to rebuild the temple in this. So you can see up to this point, even with Nebuchadnezzar, he had his moments where he lost his mind, right? But largely, Nebuchadnezzar was good to the Jewish people. Largely, King Cyrus was good to the Jewish people, and this is where he's commanding to build the temple again. And then after the Persian Empire, there's a king called Darius of the Medes. And this is seen in Ezra chapter 6, verses 1 through 12. And it says that King Darius issued a decree and searched the archives where the treasures were stored in Babylon. And this is where he realized that King Cyrus had agreed to build the temple because the people of Israel had gotten discouraged. See, I don't think we understand the importance of the prophetic voice, the priesthood, and the temple. I don't think we grasp that today because, we have our quiet time and we have the Holy Spirit living inside of us and, we have the voice of God and we've got the church and if something was to happen to this church, you go to another church, right? And, we got churches all over the place, but the temple, that was it. That was the entirety of God's dwelling among the people. That was the place where God chose to dwell, in Jerusalem, in the temple, in the Holy of Holies. The way to access him was through the priesthood, and the way to understand the direction that you were supposed to go was through the prophetic voice. All that is gone. There's no temple, the priesthood is a mess, and there's no prophets. So the temple gets restored, obviously. In Ezra and Nehemiah, the wall is rebuilt. And then after this, we're kind of outside the Bible timeline. We're in that 400-year window. And there was a man by the name of Alexander. He was the son of Philip, and Philip was a student of Socrates, Aristotle, these philosophers in Greek philosophy. And Philip believed that Greek life, which became known as Hellenization, was the highest. It was almost like the Pharisees and Hebrew, their relationship to Hebrew. It's like Hebrew is the holy language. Hebrew is God's language. The Hebrew culture is the highest culture. So Philip began to start this process of trying to Hellenize the world, to make them all Greek. And Alexander the Great, his son, I'm sure you know some of his story. He was only 33 years old when he died. But in those 33 years, he was able to nearly conquer the entire known world. So Alexander the Great defeats the Mede and the Persian Empire. They were kind of merged. But then he dies, like suddenly. It's pretty unexpected. He's very young, and he has no children. It's actually rumored he was homosexual. I don't know if that was true or not, but it's just kind of one of the rumors. But he had no heir. But he had 4 generals. And these 4 generals were named Ptolemy, Seleucus, Cassander, and Lysimachus. Now, Lysimachus and Cassander were both defeated pretty quickly. They never really amounted to anything. But Ptolemy and the Seleucids, they became very powerful. The Ptolemaic dynasty. Anybody heard of the Ptolemaic dynasty? That's what? Egypt. Alexandria. Have you heard of Alexandria and the Alexandrian Library? That was under the Ptolemaic dynasty. World power, center of learning, center of education. Their library was the envy of the world, most of it which was destroyed through a fire. And then Seleucus was kind of the Mesopotamian, Syrian, that area. And the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, they kept taking turns kind of being in power. And then there was this man by the name of Antiochus IV. And he named himself Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes. Does anybody know what Epiphanes means? It's like an epiphany when you have a revelation. And he named himself Antiochus Epiphanes because he thought he was the revelation of God in human form. He demanded worship. He demanded everyone to practice no religion except the religion he approved. And that included the Jews. No circumcision, no Sabbath keeping, no temple worship. In fact, in the book of 1 Maccabees, there are women that chose death rather than to not circumcise their children. And when they killed the mothers, they would hang the babies from their necks to die. This is how vicious and violent this man was. If you practiced the Sabbath, you would be killed. If you tried to worship at the temple, you would be killed. So for the first time in Jewish history, not only do they lack prophetic voice, not only do they lack the priesthood, and not only is the temple not accessible, but they can't even practice their own religion. They can't even circumcise their children. They can't pray. They can't do anything without fear and risk of death. Now, we see little pockets of this happen in the Bible, right? We see Nebuchadnezzar, but Nebuchadnezzar has these moments where he comes to his senses, right? We even see Darius, where no one can pray to anyone but me. But then he comes to his senses and prays for Daniel and even kind of flips the script on his wise men. But this guy is a different level of evil. He's a very wicked man. And what's really interesting about Antiochus IV, or Antiochus the Epiphanes, is Daniel prophesied about him. In Daniel chapter 8, verses 9 through 14, this is pretty fascinating. This is hundreds of years before. What in the world is going on? That's funny. So here we are in the middle of Daniel, and Daniel's prophesying, and he says, "And out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land." We're going to read through this. It says, "And it grew up to the host of heaven, and cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them." So now I want to go back to that because we can't just fly through that. What is that telling you that this man is working with? Say again? Yes, principalities and powers and authorities. Do we have this confirmed later on in the book of Daniel when he says that he's fighting with the prince of Persia, but next he's going to have to fight with the prince of Greece? See, that's what we're dealing with here. But let's look at these next couple of verses. This is fascinating. It says, "He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him taking daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his own sanctuary was cast down. Because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose daily sacrifices, to cast truth to the ground. He did all this and prospered. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, 'How long will the vision concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host, be trampled underfoot?'" And this is wild. "And he said to me, 'For 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed.'" Does anybody know how many days, how many years that is? 2,300 days. So somewhere close to 7 years. Which is where we get this whole idea of, and we got Jewish years, by the way. They didn't have the 365 days like we do. So it's approximately 7 years. This is where we get the idea of the 7-year tribulation. I want to paint a picture of this man Antiochus. And you can see that Daniel prophesied him and what he would do. And it was called later the abomination that causes desolation. I believe that's in Daniel 12:11. Where, when we see Jesus reference the abomination that causes desolation as well, right? But we'll get to that in a minute. So as I mentioned, the earlier rulers pretty well allowed the Jews to live according to their laws. Just don't cause any rebellion. We see that in Rome, don't we? We even see that in Ephesus, where the Jews are kind of fighting and fussing, and the powers that be say, hey, stop this. You're inciting a rebellion. You're going to cause Rome to come down on us. So the Jews were largely able to live their lives, just provided they didn't cause a ruckus, but that was no more. And Daniel prophesied this. As I said, they were even permitted to rebuild the temple. They were permitted to rebuild the wall. But here's an interesting story going back to Alexander. Anybody ever heard of the Jewish historian Josephus? Do you know that Josephus was a journalist for Rome? He was a Jewish journalist for Rome. So he kept history. And I've actually got his book, and Philo and several other ancient historians. But when Alexander the Great, let's back up to Alexander the Great again. When he was conquering the world, he was ripping through territories, and they found out he was headed toward Jerusalem. And the priests were in a panic. It's like he's gonna tear down the temple, he's gonna take over our city, we're not going to be able to do our sacrifices. And there was this priest named, I don't know how to say it exactly, but I think it's Jedua. And Jedua had a vision. And in this vision, as Alexander the Great was, now this is not Bible, obviously. But as he was having this vision, he saw Alexander the Great coming into a city, and God said, wear your priestly garment. Not your tunic, like the purple and the full ephod and everything. Wear the whole thing. So the priest did it. Consequently, Alexander the Great had a dream. This is all recorded by Josephus. And in the dream, he sees this priest wearing this holy garment. And in the dream, he is told this priest is going to give him instructions about his future. So when he goes into Jerusalem, lo and behold, there's Jedua in his priestly garments, and Alexander is like, wow. And then Jedua takes him to the book of Daniel. And he shows him how he is going to defeat the Persian Empire. Let's go to Daniel chapter 8, verse 20 through 22. We're going to take you through exactly what he read to Alexander, if this story is true. The ram which you saw, having two horns, they are the kings of Media, however you say it, and Persia. And the male goat is the kingdom of Greece. The large horn that is between its eyes is the first king. As for the broken horn and the four that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation, but not with its power. So Alexander the Great saw this as a sign. And he told Jerusalem, he told the leaders there, you all do whatever you want to do. And then he went out and fulfilled this prophecy by overthrowing the Mede and the Persian Empire. Not much longer he died, and his kingdom was divided into 4. 4 kingdoms arose out of him. It is remarkable how accurate Daniel was as a prophet. So the combination of the dream, the priestly garments, the prophetic vision, it convinced Alexander that the Jews were favored by God. He was like, I ain't messing with them people. So a note here. While Josephus preserves a historical tradition, some details like the dream may include legend. We don't know, but Josephus seems to be a pretty accurate historian. This is not like Jewish folklore where the 8 days of oil in the temple and Hanukkah and all that stuff, which I'll get to in a minute. I am convinced this event actually happened. So all that earlier tolerance that they had earned through Nebuchadnezzar and Cyrus and Darius and even Alexander, now that's over. Circumcision, Sabbath observance, Torah reading, it's all outlawed and you'll be killed. This is all found in 1 Maccabees chapter 1. I do encourage you to read the Maccabees. The temple was desecrated, and Antiochus Epiphanes sacrificed to Zeus, and he also sacrificed a pig in the temple. You want to talk about offensive to the Jewish people? That's offensive. But on top of that, he erected an altar over top of the altar of burnt offerings. And this is what's recognized as the abomination that causes desolation. This is mentioned in Daniel 11:31, and it's also mentioned in Daniel 12:11. This event. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and do Daniel 11:31. It says, "And the forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress, and they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation." Then go to Daniel 12. This is interesting. It says, "And from the time the daily sacrifice is taken away, the abomination of desolation is set up. There shall be 1,290 days." Does anybody know how long that is? That's about 3.5 years on the Jewish calendar. This is where we get the Antichrist will break the treaty in the middle of the week. This is where we get the idea of the 7-year tribulation period and the whole Antichrist narrative. And the funny thing is, this seems to be a separate event in Daniel. This doesn't seem to be the same abomination that causes desolation. See, Jesus says, when you see the abomination that causes desolation as what? Spoken by Daniel the prophet. So Jesus is talking about an event that hasn't occurred yet. So Antiochus Epiphanes was not the Antichrist, but he was an Antichrist. See, one thing you will notice about Old Testament prophecy is it is fulfilled in stages. It's not always fulfilled in a single event. Because when Jesus talked about the abomination that causes desolation, does anybody know when it happened the second time? 70 AD in Jerusalem under Nero, when he destroyed the temple and again sacrificed a pig. An abomination and total desecration of the temple. Let's go to Matthew chapter 24, verse 15 and 16. And let's talk about where Jesus mentions this. See, we can't just gloss over Hanukkah just because it's not a canonical event, because it really speaks to what happened. It says, "Therefore, when you see, what does that indicate? It hasn't happened yet. And it also indicates this event they are going to see." Who is he talking to? Is he talking to the church at this time? No, he's talking to Israel. It says, "When you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand." So again, in 70 AD, we see this event fulfilled again. Is that the ultimate fulfillment? It is not. Because in the end times, in fact, let's go to Revelation chapter 13. Revelation chapter 13. And you could go to 2 Thessalonians. There's all kinds of places that you could go. But it says, "Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon. And he exercised all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and caused the earth, those who dwell in it, to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed." Now, the book of Revelation was most likely written somewhere around 100 AD. So that means we are after the events of the destruction of the temple. It says he performs signs so great that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth and in the sight of man. He deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which was granted to do in the sight of the beast, and those who dwell on the earth, and to make an image of the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. So there's so much to this, we just don't have time. We're going to be doing end times next year. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, and the image of the beast should speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. So you see the same pattern. Same pattern as Antiochus Epiphanes, same pattern as Nero. You could even say Hitler was a type. He causes both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave to receive a mark on their right hand or their foreheads, that no one may buy or sell except he who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, for his number is 666. Now I've been told, I don't understand this, but that Antiochus Epiphanes and Nero both, if you use their name in some perspective languages, that it equals 666. Pretty fascinating. I don't know where I sit on what the mark of the beast is. I don't know if it's an idea, a concept, a literal mark. Those things are all debated and have been debated throughout church history forever. But what I do know the mark of the beast is definitely going to be is an alliance to the evil kingdom. And see, that's what these Antichrist types try to do. They try to get you to ally with evil. That's what Antiochus tried to do. That's what Nero tried to do. And that's what this ultimate fulfillment of the Antichrist is going to do. The Bible describes him as pretty much Satan incarnate in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, which we may be able to get into here in just a moment. So some things to take away from this portion of the story is Antiochus' desecration was a foreshadowing, not the final fulfillment. The abomination that causes desolation is progressive and recurring. It occurred with Antiochus, with Nero, and it's going to occur again in the end times. And it's all going to occur in Jerusalem, and it's going to be centered in the temple. Because where did the Antichrist set up the image of the beast? In Jerusalem. Same pattern, over and over. Antiochus and Nero were among the greatest persecutors of Jews and Christians outside of Hitler. This pattern demonstrates that God's people are called to faithfulness, even through trials. So now let's run through the Maccabean revolt real quick, and we'll work our way through this. The persecution under Antiochus sparked a revolt. The Jews were frustrated. They were tired of it. And there was this man by the name of Mattathias, and he was a priest. And later on, his son, Judah Maccabee, called the Rock. And what followed wasn't this massive military victory. It wasn't this big organized army that defeated an empire. It was guerrilla warfare. It was like the Minutemen of the U.S. popping out of the hills and hollers and just fighting however they could. But somehow they won. They were victorious. They were able to recapture Jerusalem, and the temple was cleansed and rededicated, which the whole idea behind Hanukkah is restoration and dedication. That God is one who restores when people dedicate themselves to him. So the temple was dedicated again, and modeled after the Feast of Tabernacles, it was an 8-day festival that they celebrated. Zechariah chapter 14, verse 20 through 21. Do we have that? It says, "In that day, holiness of the Lord shall be engraved in the bells of the horses, and the pots in the Lord's house shall be like bowls before the altar. Yes, every pot in Jerusalem and Judah shall be holiness to the Lord of hosts. Everyone who sacrifices shall come and take them and cook them. In that day there shall no longer be a Canaanite in the house of the Lord of hosts." So this prophesies an event of restoration and dedication of the temple. Some believe that this actually prophesies the Maccabean revolt, but I believe that's a little too simplistic. Another thing that's interesting about 70 AD, when Nebuchadnezzar came in and destroyed the temple, what eventually happened? It was rebuilt. When Antiochus Epiphanes destroyed the temple, what ultimately happened? It was rebuilt. Even Herod the Great came in and made the temple more magnificent than it had ever been. But after 70 AD, when Nero destroyed the temple, it has never been rebuilt. As a matter of fact, today you will see a dome sitting where they believe the temple site is, the dome on the rock. It is under the authority of Islam. So the people of Israel still have no temple. They still have no prophet other than through the church if they would listen. And they have, I guess, freedom to pray at the wall, but it's under somewhat duress. So some lessons we can learn from Hanukkah. Number one, be faithful even in the midst of persecution. We've heard a lot that persecution very well could come to America. Let's go to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3 and 4. It says, "Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped. So he sits as God in the temple, showing himself that he is God. So we have clearly an event where someone sets themselves up as God in the temple. Now, as far as I know, Nero never did that. Nero only destroyed the temple. I don't think he ever actually set himself up as God like Antiochus Epiphanes did and like this Antichrist is going to do. So, I don't know what the end times look like perfectly. I don't know if we're pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib. I suspect that we're pre-wrath. I'll explain what all this means next year when we go into eschatology. I do not believe God's going to pour his wrath out with this church still present on the earth. But, man, that leaves a lot of speculation. But what I do know is that it is very possible that we can face persecution. And we can learn lessons from this 400-year period where they were faithful, where they refused to not circumcise their children, where they refused to not pray, where they refused to not offer their sacrifices, where they refused to not worship their God at the threat of their own life. Another reminder is that God is faithful to a remnant that trusts in him. Let's go to Isaiah 10, verse 20 through 23. I absolutely love this. It says, "And it shall come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel." Now, who is Israel today? The church grafted it. Now, this is interesting because has the church replaced Israel? No, the church has not replaced Israel. We are alongside Israel. We are one with Israel, but Israel is still its own thing. Now, I'm going to tell you something else that I believe that may be a little controversial. I do not believe that the Western installation that they call Israel is true Israel. I believe that's a world government set up that is in that land. That's just what I think. I believe true Israel has yet to be restored. When I'm talking about true Israel, I'm talking about the ethnic Israel and that land. I don't believe that land has been restored yet. It's propped up right now by a government and used as a political pawn. You got to admit, we've made a lot of decisions as America based on Zionism. And Zionism is the belief that Israel deserves to exist. And how many of y'all would agree with that? That Israel deserves to exist. That would make us a Zionist. They deserve to be able to defend themselves, right? But there's also extremes where Israel can do no wrong. Everything they do is perfect, and everything they do is wonderful, and they've never done an evil thing. Oh gosh, just read their history. Israel has been terrible in certain times. But they've also been the most mistreated, persecuted, and abused people group probably in history. So we have to separate the political policy manufactured Israel from the people, ethnic Israel. I believe that God is going to redeem ethnic Israel, and I believe he's going to set up a kingdom. And it's going to include ethnic Israel that is saved and the church. Now, how does a Jew get saved? What's their process of salvation? Same as ours. It's no different. Their ethnicity does not earn them any favors. Yes, they're God's chosen people, and they are the chosen method that God used to bring salvation to the world. But if they reject their Messiah, they go to the same hell. It's hard to wrap our heads around, isn't it? Because we view Israel as so special, and they are. But folks, these are a people that have rejected Jesus. They need the gospel. They need to receive Jesus. And I think it's in Romans chapter 11 when it says, if Israel's rejection has led to hope for the Gentiles, how much more will their acceptance be? For the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. So we need to pray for Israel. We need to pray for God's people to come to know Jesus. We need to pray for Messianic Jews to rise up out of the darkness and begin to share Jesus in those hard places so that ethnic Israel can accept their Messiah. What a tragedy to be the source of your salvation and reject it. So pray for Israel. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. But don't get sucked into this political system, this pawn that is posing as Israel. And I'm not saying that the Israeli government is not, please don't put words in my mouth. But what I am telling you is this system put in by NATO and the United Nations, it's a political system. It's an earthly system. How many times do you hear the Israeli government even acknowledge God? Rarely. Rarely. We need to pray for them. Because folks, when you don't acknowledge God, you are incapable of horrible things. Or did I say incapable? I meant to say you're capable of horrible things. I don't know what's going on at the Gaza Strip. I don't know who the good guys and the bad guys are. The media is so confusing. And if you're a Zionist, you're supposed to say Israel's the good guys. If you're not the Zionist, you're supposed to say the Palestinians are the good guys. I happen to think that there's good guys and bad guys on both sides of the fence. You know there's Palestinian Christians. You know there's Israeli Christians. Do you know that both of them are suffering right now? Why? I don't know. The media, can we trust the media? Can we trust information that's even coming from the Gaza Strip? Do you know why? Because we're getting one side and the other side. If you listen to the Jews, then they're always the victims, and if you listen to the Palestinians, they're always the victims. So this is a very hard thing to get our head around, but here's what I will say without any apology. We fly that flag not as a political symbol, but as a spiritual hope. We support Israel not as a political entity, but as a spiritual hope. That God will redeem and renew and restore his people. Just like he did during the Maccabean revolt. When they defeated this powerful military, guerrilla style, set up the temple, they didn't have enough priests, they didn't have enough oil, according to legend. And the legend says that the oil lasted 8 days supernaturally. Now, there's nothing that confirms that story, but what we do know is that they burned candles for 8 days somehow. Either they found pure oil or something miraculous happened. Another thing that Hanukkah reminds us of, besides the fact that we remain faithful in the midst of persecution, that God is faithful to a remnant that trusts in him, is that light always wins. Light always wins. John 1:4-5. I love this. Because Jesus was that light. It says, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Light always wins. John 8:12. Do we have that one? It says, then Jesus spoke to them again, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. I want to close with this thought, and then we'll go enjoy some fellowship in the foyer. Did Jesus not reveal something about himself or accomplish something major at every Jewish canonical feast? Some of the most controversial events that Jesus did in his life were during feasts. He died during Passover. He raised during first fruits, or first fruits. And some people believe he was born during Sukkot. I can't confirm that, but every feast, Jesus did something. What did Jesus decide to do during Sukkot? He said, I am the living water. He participated in the water ceremony. There's so much. So, old non-canonical Hanukkah, Jesus probably didn't do nothing at that one, did he? That wasn't important. It's not in the Bible, right? Well, actually, in John chapter 10. John chapter 10, starting with verse 22. It says, now it was the feast of dedication in Jerusalem. Does anybody know what the feast of dedication is? That is Hanukkah. It's also called the Festival of Lights. And it was winter. So it was about right now. It says, Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. Then the Jews surrounded him and said to him, how long do you keep us in doubt? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly. Jesus answered him, I told you and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name, they bear witness of me. But you do not believe because you are not my sheep, as I said to you. My sheep hear my voice, and and I know them, and they follow me. And I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. Neither shall anyone snatch them out of my hand. This is where it gets serious. My Father, who has given them to me, is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of my Father's hands. And then he drops the bomb. I and my Father are one. This is what Jesus chose to reveal during Hanukkah. That I am the one you've been waiting for. I am the Redeemer. I am the light of the world. I am the Messiah. I am the Son of God. I am God in the flesh. And I'm here to rescue you from all enemies. Now, ultimately, we know that the Jews thought that meant something different. They thought it was immediate. Turns out it was not. But this is a pretty important holiday, a pretty important season. And it's a reminder that light always wins. It's a reminder that God restores that which is dedicated. And it's a reminder to be willing to press through even if you have opposition and suffering. So, Father, in the name of Jesus, I pray, God, that you would just help us to understand the importance of this season that we're in. Lord, I pray for everyone that's sick. There's so many people that are out sick today. I pray that you would just bless them, cause them to be able to be well quickly. And Lord, just bless our fellowship today. In Jesus' name, amen. Bless the food, too. The 45 strawberries.